All right. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight to have a part of this vital conversation. And we will begin by saying we are partnering tonight with our good friends at the Wyoming Institute for Humanities Research to put this project together. So WIRE has what we call Think and Drink discussions, and this represents a combination between Wyoming Institute of Humanities Research, Think and Drink sessions, and the Black Studies third part of a four-part series about Black studies and if Black studies still matters. Tonight is a very, very crucial conversation, very timely, very relevant, and in many ways, a conversation that many people are avoiding. And we know that in Wyoming, it's a very monolithic crowd. So in many ways, there are justifications. Many ways, there are angles to get around this particular conversation. But with the Black Studies Center, we aim to add to the dominant narrative by challenging the historical discourse. So today, this evening, we have a conversation with our guests that will be, well, hold us to this account. Hold us to this account. If we extended the mainstream narrative, if we challenge the status quo of white supremacy tonight. So as we begin, that will be the criteria from which you can judge this conversation. So we're going to talk about medical mistrust, vaccines, and the Black community. Now we have two very special guests, and I would like for everyone to be able to understand that this conversation is something that needs to be happening in many spaces, particularly on college campuses as the host or the hub of intellectual curiosity. So today we will do our best to answer those questions. So I'll begin with Dr. Lorett Oben Shabazz, who is out of Western Illinois. And as a scientist, I think her angle will be ultimately important in giving us our thoughts and giving us a different view. And also we have a very special guest, a dear friend and a dear brother Minister Muhammad out of Los Angeles, brother Sayyid Malik Muhammad out of Los Angeles. He has been working with this topic for the last 5 years. So I think his angle will be more than just something that we call typical. So we thank you all for being here, and because of we want to respect everybody's time, it's time for us to begin. So when you think about it, Dr. Oben Shabazz, we think about vaccines. I would like to really quickly go over a historic piece about vaccines. I think about how America has gotten to where we are now. A couple of key points that we can discuss about America and how they got to this point is the beginning of the 20th century. And we know that doesn't do us well as a point of reference, but it'll prove to be empirically important tonight. So I think about the eugenics movement and what that meant in 1900 to 1931. How when we understand the cousin of Charles Darwin, Francis Galton, and the way he cultivated, the way he shaped everything that we understand about the eugenics movement and social Darwinism. And that in itself says that some folks should reproduce while others should not. So when we think about that being the start of the 20th century and we take a step back and we go to the transatlantic slave trade. And here, when you see the last name Dixon, it is a reminder, a constant reminder that from what my people went through and those who look just like me, that those who have the longest history being the original man now have the shortest history to have a reference point. So when I think about the last name Dixon, it ties to the transatlantic slave trade. And realistically, what it says is that right now to this day, it's still a slave name. So thinking about transatlantic slave trade, thinking about the eugenics movement, and we're going to go on to some other pieces, but that kind of sets the pace about science, scientific warfare, and what we'll discuss tonight. So when we talk about medical mistrust, vaccines, and the Black community, it has been for years problematic when we think about it. We're going to go through some of the specific items. So when I think about it, Dr. Oben, Shabazz, if you could give us your thoughts as a scientist about perhaps those leading factors that allow for many Blacks, a critical amount of Blacks, to have mistrust with the medical community.
Certainly. So thank you for inviting me this evening. I do appreciate it. As you're stating, I am a professor at Western Illinois University. I'm also, just to give a little background, I'm also the department chair for health sciences and social work at Western Illinois University, and the interim dean for the honors college there. And this particular topic is very interesting to me. It's very important to me. I chair the Minority Health Month committee on campus. So we spend a lot of time looking at different health issues and how they impact various populations within the United States. But in particular, taking a look at what's going on with the Black population and why there's such mistrust right now with the current vaccines that are out there. It really stems from a lot of what you've already stated, right? So we know about eugenics and what went on with that in terms of deciding which individuals should reproduce and which shouldn't, in terms of, only having the best in society, and those who are disabled or who they deem not relevant to be forcefully or without their knowledge actually sterilized. So we know there was a lot that went on there. But one of the ones that I think really many people go back to all the time is the Tuskegee study, right? So the Tuskegee study was conducted with the US public health system from 1932 to 1972. That's quite a long period of time, right? 40 years, and hundreds of Black men with syphilis were part of that, unknowingly a part of that study. They were under the belief that they were being treated for syphilis. They went in regularly for treatment, but they were not being treated for the disease, which could have been cured, right? At different stages of syphilis, it could be cured prior to it getting to the final stage where people suffer a lot of harm and they end up dying from the disease. Had the treatment been received, they would have been cured. Many of them died as a result. And many people see this particular study as just a blatant act of genocide on the Black population perpetrated by white individuals. So there was already this mistrust going on. It was not until 1995, 23 years after the study ended, that then President Clinton at the time offered an apology to the men and to their families. So really it shows quite a bit of the value that was placed on the lives of Black men in particular at that time, and how long it took to even recognize that something took place and it should be even addressed. So people today, they're thinking, well, this is a new vaccine. They're using messenger RNA in the vaccines. What does all of that mean? Is it going to impact my DNA? Is it going to alter some things for me? I don't trust it, right? They're thinking, well, I'm not going to participate with this vaccine until I know more about it. So it's really not unfounded, right? Those are relevant concerns that people do have, and we're here tonight to try to address some of those. So I don't know how much you want me to say right at this point, but it's something that I really want to have a conversation about, so we can clear up some myths and things associated.
And thank you for that thought. Brother Minister Malik, we are thinking about the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. And if we could begin there, I just want to think about the presidents. We mean the law of the land at the highest, at the bell tower, that were involved, not just indirectly, but complicit in an explicit manner. FDR, Truman, Eisenhower, Kennedy, Nixon, and Ford, who brought to us and for the most part signed off, said it was in good science. So when we think about that, brother, we have to think about those surgeon generals who are part of this, Mr. Hugh Cummings, Thomas Perrin, Leonard Schill, Leroy Burney, Luther Terry, William Stewart, Jesse Steinfeld, all involved at the highest of the medical community that agreed and thought that this was in the name of good science. So, Brother Minister, if you could give us your thoughts on the backdrop of where we are now, and then feel free to give us your thoughts.
Sure. First of all, Dr. Dixon, thank you. And I want to thank the Wyoming Institute for allowing us to just even have this platform.
Yes, sir.
It's an honor to be on the platform with yourself and Dr. Oben, Shabazz. And I too, dear brother, before Minister Farrakhan changed my name to Muhammad, before Muhammad, my last name was Dixon. So I gave it back. And what an honor. But to the students and those of you who are listening, it's truly an indeed honor to come before you regardless of class, creed, or color. Because there's been so many walls built between us that make us fear one another. But it's platforms like this where we all could come and share, our fears, our reservations about things, and present the facts as to why we are the way we are. So first, let me thank Almighty God and all of the servants who come in a line of divine. Since we're in Black History Month, I have to thank all of the great pioneers and those who have been fighting for our liberation, for us to be recognized. I have to thank Nat Turner, Noble Jew Ali. We have to thank Harriet Tubman, Soldier of Truth. We have to thank Marcus Garvey. We have to thank Malcolm X. We have to thank Dr. King. We have to thank the most honorable Elijah Muhammad. But I have to thank the man that saved my life, that pulled me out of the fields of ignorance and put me on a path of knowledge. And that man is the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. So, brother, I thank you because as a spiritual man, I have to come at this from a spiritual perspective as well as history. But we're taught that history is most attractive and best rewarding in all research. Because when you see something happening in history and it presents itself as a pattern, then you can determine what you're involved in. And in America, they have that same system. If I have a habit of getting arrested 10 times, 20 times, 50 times, I have developed a historical record of being a criminal. And so if I'm an armed robber and I'm out of prison and someone get robbed near where I live, do you know the police will show up and arrest me and put me in a lineup? Not that I did anything wrong. It is because I have a history of doing something wrong. So before I would like to just read something from the book of Ephesians. Where in the book of Ephesians in chapter 6, it says, we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against the powers and the rulers of this world, and against spiritual wickedness in high places. And Dr. Dixon, you just gave the names of presidents from 1932 to 1972 who have been involved and who said that the science towards the Tuskegee experiment was right and exact. That's spiritual wickedness in high places. And so when we look at it, when we look at the history of what has happened to us, from the time we entered the boats until now, and let me tell you, this genocide is still going on, but they're doing it in plain sight. They're doing it in the name of Planned Parenthood as we speak. And if you study Margaret Sanger, she was one of the biggest racists on the planet. Your students, go research it for yourself. And she said this word. Remember, before Planned Parenthood was Planned Parenthood, it was called the Negro Project. See, so we've always been experimented on. And she said, Negroes are like weed and they need to be destroyed. Then when she was asked, how can we get this over on the Black population? Listen at what she said. Find Black preachers with engaging personalities. See, let us get the plan. Let's come to them in the name of help. But do not let them know that our real motive is extermination. That's what she said. That's in her writings. And so now they went to our pastors and then they start pushing this abortion, but it's really a form of sterilization. And so, dear brother, this has been, just a pattern. And so in the 1960s, when the polio vaccine came out, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad told to the followers of the nation, do not take the polio vaccine, because this was around the time when Kissinger and the policy of America was depopulation. And the Honorable Elijah Muhammad said, they have scientists who are now studying genetically how to exterminate people based on their genomes or based on their racial makeup. Whether they're able to do this or not, I don't know. I'm not a scientist. But I believe that he's a spiritual man, and I believe that he's divinely guided. And so therefore, when you look at this history, the reason I got involved with vaccines 5 years ago, it is because at the CDC right now, there is a doctor, epidemiologist by the name of Dr. William Thompson. And Dr. William Thompson is a whistleblower who admitted that the MMR vaccine, if it's given to Black boys before they're 2 years old, there's an increase of autism at the rate of 340% greater than their white counterpart. I listened to his tapes. I listened to his confession. And he begged Congress to bring him back before Congress, and he hired the #1 whistleblower attorney. And they won't even bring him back to give his findings, and he still work at the CDC. So Bobby Kennedy reached out for many of our Black politicians, many of our Black spiritual leaders, and he took them to science because Dr. Thompson sent his paperwork out to many in the science field who got a hold of his records where he and his co-authors couldn't believe it. What the MMR vaccine was doing to Black boys. And when they were putting this study before their bosses, the pharmaceutical industry put so much pressure on them that they told him to throw it away, and Dr. Thompson didn't do it. And it's no coincidence, because 40 years later, it gets into the hand of Robert Kennedy. And you know, Dr. Dixon, it was a Black man who went to Teddy Kennedy. It was a Kennedy who helped to expose the Tuskegee experiment. 40 years later, Robert Kennedy is trying to help expose something is going wrong at the CDC. And when he brought it to me, I called Minister Farrakhan, and when we took the findings, and we took several scientists who have written medical papers on it, and epidemiologists, and as they was telling the minister how this could be done, Minister Farrakhan said, so you're telling me that if Black boys take the battery of vaccines that has been laid out for our children, you know how many doses of vaccines they're saying that our babies should take before they're 2 years old? He said, so if they do it before then, that's where you're having the highest effect? And Bobby Kennedy and the scientist says, yes. He said, well, that's in the Bible. He said, when Herod knew that there was time for a Messiah, he made a decree to kill all boy babies 2 years old and under. The same thing happened in Egypt when Pharaoh summons the midwife, and Pharaoh had a same decree, kill all boy babies 2 and under. So the male has always been on the attack when they're in bondage. So we can't trust this, dear brother. And I have so much more that we could give. Dr. Marion Sims, he is the father of gynecology. Look at what he did to Black women with no anesthesia. The way he ruptured the womb of these women and put them under extraordinary pain. But yet this Caucasian is called the father of gynecology. And now, since the Black Lives Matter, they're snatching his statues down all over the world. Why won't we snatch down Planned Parenthood? Why don't we snatch down the FDA? Why don't we snatch down the CDC? Because Dr. Oben told us the name of the US agency that performed the Tuskegee experiment. But Dr. Oben, you know, they changed their name to the CDC. Same people. So I just say to you, here's what I say to people. Show me a clinic that a Jewish brother and a sister would go to with Hitler's name on it. The protocols that are being used on us are the same protocols that was used under Hitler. And now with eugenics, now you got Bill Gates. Do you know his parents were eugenists? Do you know now they're parading him around like he's an expert or a scientist when Bill Gates himself is a population controlist and he wants to cull the population? He had talks on the TED Talk. And they asked him, how can we decrease the population? And guess what he said? We can do this by using new vaccines, reproductive health services, and abortions. This is Mr. Gates. So we can't trust this, man. And this is why we need our own scientists, our own epidemiologists. It's beautiful to have a Dr. Oben, someone who loves us to such a degree that we'll put our life on what we say before we let our people take it. But we can't let other scientists bring us something and then ask us to put our name on it using money. So I'll stop right there, dear brother. But we cannot trust this. Wait till I tell you about the CDC and the committees who passed these vaccines. Wait till I tell you about many of them own the patents. And so when Bobby Kennedy brought it to me, and I saw that in 1986, please listen to this. This is what got me more than anything. In 1986, the pharmaceutical industry was threatening to leave America. They was putting so much pressure on Congress and the Senate. So Congress and the Senate passed a bill titled the 1986 Childhood Vaccine Injury Act. Guess what your government did? They passed a law making it impossible that if your child or you is injured taking a vaccine, you cannot sue the pharmaceutical industry. That to me is dangerous. Why would you give them a pass? What do you mean I can't sue them? And right after 1986 is when we saw all of these new vaccines. And at that same time, we saw this skyrocketing stats of injury, the stats of autism went up, ADHD, all of these mental disorders took off at the same time. All these new vaccines got introduced. So brothers and sisters, the vaccine, the pharmaceutical industry makes trillions of dollars, but yet they are not held liable for killing us or hurting us. You have to go to a vaccine injury court where Shaniqua and Roberta, they're poor. They can't even afford an attorney to go to the vaccine injury court. And when I went around to 70 cities and introduced the film titled Vax, and Black mothers was in the office and in the audience. And when I showed that film and they saw that these babies that was on that film, nothing was wrong with them up to 2 years old. Many of them, after they took the vaccine at 2 years old, became docile. And many Black mothers screamed in the audience and said, they tried to make me believe that my child had autism because of me. And so we have to look into this very careful. I'm sorry. I'm sorry if you are another ethnicity. You got to understand, we can't trust this government. I can't trust their science. See, I wouldn't blame the Native American. We can't trust you. You don't have a good history. Your record, your history record is not good. And so therefore, until we get scientists like Dr. Oben and others that we could trust, maybe then we will allow them to vaccinate us. And I close with this. When has this government ever made us first in anything? All of a sudden, you want us at the top of this vaccine? Number one, Dr. Oben, they should stop calling it a vaccine. It's not a vaccine yet. They're calling it an experimental vaccine, meaning it has not proven yet to be a vaccine. So that's my little spiel, and I hope to take questions, but you got me fired up. So thank you.
Well, thank you. And that's why we're here, to put it on the table, Brother Minister, to lay out what's the truth, what's the facts. And if any place we should be able to have this conversation, it's a place of higher intellect. Now, I will agree that if they can't treat you right, they can't teach you right. And if they can't teach you right, it's impossible for them to give you an idea of what it is that's best for you in the world of medicine. So Dr. Oben, as we move forward and we think about some of the things that become challenges with a vaccine, particularly a vaccine that is, as Brother Minister brought up, that comes about so quickly. I can remember the mainstream news cycles explaining how quickly this became authorized, how quickly it became mainstream. So as a scientist, what are those things that challenge you most, or those things that become instant things that you want to challenge or look at maybe in a different manner?
So thank you very much. So my thoughts are on this particular vaccine. You're correct. It is has been authorized for emergency use for the vaccine. When I did my research to find out more about messenger RNA with this vaccine, I found out that messenger RNA in being used to create vaccines is not something brand new. They've been experimenting or looking into this for a number of years with messenger RNA. It's just when this particular illness became evident and they needed to move forward quickly with this vaccine, there was a lot of pressure. You're absolutely correct. A lot of pressure to get this out as quickly as possible. The studies that I saw looking at messenger RNA, they did test different vaccines on animals, and it did not go well, right? So those, the animals ended up having very serious side effects. They end up having worse conditions, and many of them died from not the COVID vaccine, from other vaccines that they were testing out with messenger RNA. So they did not test this particular vaccine, from my knowledge, on animals. This is one where they did human clinical trials on this particular vaccine. It has not been around very long, this is true, but from the studies that they're showing, the Pfizer BioNTech vaccine and Moderna seem to be highly effective, with Pfizer being 95% effective and Moderna roughly around 94% effective. They do have different, so Pfizer can be given to those 16 and older, and Moderna is 18 and older. So they're slightly different in that regard, but they're pretty much the same type of a vaccine. And you're right, we don't know the long-term effects. We know there have been many pregnant women have been concerned, should they take this particular vaccine during a pregnancy, what impact could it possibly have on a developing fetus? We really don't know. Some women did become pregnant during the clinical trials, but that did not yield, enough results to say how it may actually translate as they move, forward with the pregnancy and, they deliver a baby. What is that going to be like? We don't have any long-term studies on this particular vaccine. But I also look at the number of cases around the world and in the United States in particular. And I keep comparing it back to the flu of 1918 that went around the world very quickly. We know with the flu of 1918, roughly 500 million people were infected with that particular flu. And they really have an estimate on how many people may have died from that flu. And it's quite a high number, right around 50 million worldwide, or at the time, about 1/3 of the world's population ended up, suffering some sort of consequence from the flu. There are lessons from that 1918 flu. It was from an H1N1 virus that caused that particular flu. This one is from like the SARS type of a virus that's causing this particular condition. So they're not exactly the same, but you see similarities in how people responded to that at the time back in 1918 to 1919. They did not have the clinical means or the vaccines or anything like that. They simply did a lot of the non-types of clinical prevention, like wearing the mask and socially distancing. They did a lot of similar things that we are doing right now and that we started to do back in March and during the lockdown and so forth to try to combat this particular condition. But it continued to spread around the world very rapidly. And about 675,000 individuals in the United States died as a result of that. Today, there's a lot more we know with science involved. A lot more scientists were working on this particular treatment, if you want to call it at the time, to try to figure out how best to combat this particular disease and to save more lives. I'm conflicted sometimes with this because we know what happened with history. We can't ignore history, right? If we ignore history, we're bound to repeat it, correct? So we need to pay attention to what happened in history. And we also need to pay attention to advancements that have taken place with science and with technology and how that could be used. So ultimately, really people need to do some research and make the decision for themselves. I'm not going to necessarily state right out that you should be vaccinated. I'm not going to say that. Right? That's a decision people have to be made after they're educated on what is going on with the particular vaccines, what's going on right now with the new variants that are out there that we know are causing some problems around the world. We know that some of the variants are resistant to the vaccine, so the vaccines are not going to be effective on these particular variants. So like the United Kingdom variant is 56% more transmissible. So a lot more people may be infected once that starts circulating more. We know the South African variant is the one of a lot of concern because it's not really responding to the vaccine. So they kind of halted what they were doing there in South Africa with that. We know Brazil also has another virus that's another variant that is of significant concern. And these things happen. We know that anytime you have a virus that gets into the body and it's transmitted from person to person, it is going to mutate, right? It is going to change, right? Because the virus may start off with one particular sequence, but as it tries to replicate itself, sometimes one or two things get out of place. And so then you have a new variant, right? that variant may not be very different from the original, so it'll still respond to whatever treatments and medications. But there are times when enough change has taken place where the new structure of that particular virus is so different that it will not respond to the current treatments. And so you need something different. So that is the real concern right now. How much is it mutating? What are the new strains that are coming out of this? And will there be an effective treatment against this? We know we have to do something, right, to try to save lives, today, and prevent a lot more infections from taking place. And we have to have the scientists working on it. I agree 100% with Brother Muhammad in terms of we really need, it would be good to have our own scientists looking at this to see what is the real impact. What gives me it gives me some hope, in terms of the current treatments that are out there is the FDA. So, and I know there are some concerns with that, but the Food and Drug Administration is the leading authority. It has many, the scientists looking at this. They did their independent review of the different vaccines, and they deemed them to be essentially safe for the population. So I take a look at that, and it gives me some hope that maybe there is some sort of treatment that will be effective in combating this particular virus. I know we have a lot more that needs to be done because we don't have the long-term data. We just don't have it. And so it's really, I don't want to say it's almost like an experiment with the current population of people who are, being impacted right now, but we have these clinical trials that are going on to test the vaccines, and we have to try to see what's going to be effective in the treatment and not cause negative, a negative impact or a negative outcome for certain segments of the population, which is what happened in the past, right? So there's still a lot of questions out there, but we need to do our own homework, our own research, find out as much as we can to make our own decisions.
Thank you, Dr. Oben Shabazz. Brother Minister, I wanted to pivot because there was something very important that you mentioned. You mentioned the time, and I think this is a very crucial time in American history when we begin to see, and you mentioned Kissinger, and during his reign, if you will, or his reign of authority, this is where we begin to see some of the questions transfer from the beginning of controlling 1 million people, then removing 1 million people from the earth. We can point right to that particular administration for these thoughts. So you mentioned that a little bit earlier. And one other thing I wanted to put on the plate, when you begin to talk about those young Black men taking this vaccine under the age of 2, or by the time the age of 2, what became very popular, and one of the things that I saw was that this was something that happened to the great R&B singer Toni Braxton. So during that time, she laid it out, and it becomes a bit more popular, but I know you were already working on it during that time. So if you could talk about the idea of how the administrations, some of those administrations, those presidential administrations have played a role in this, and then where we are now, but also to discuss how when we see someone with the stature of Toni Braxton, things become a bit more intense by other folks who at one time were probably not paying attention.
Yes, sir. Yeah, before I do that, I just wanted to cite a report of 1995 by the United States Press International. And let me just tell you what's conflicting to me when we start mentioning these agencies. According to the United Press International, they have said that the CDC, the FDA, HHS, NIH, they are conflicted because those who are supposed to be making sure that the pharmaceutical industry has done everything. But here's the problem. Do you know that some of those that are on the committees who's supposed to be checking and keeping the pharmaceutical companies in check, do you know that some of them own the patents? Some of these same people who's supposed to be doing the efficacy study gets money from the same people that they're supposed to keep in check. Something ain't right with that, according to them. Do you know that those who sit on these committees at the CDC and the FDA, do you also know that some of them own stock in the pharmaceutical companies? How can I trust that? See, so tell them to show us, do you have stock in the company that we're asking you to check out? That's something ain't right, brother. There's some wickedness going on in high places. And they want to throw all these letters at us. Trust this group, trust that group. You can't tell me somebody with a mindset of white supremacy may not be in the top levels of those groups. Kissinger was one. Zygmunt Brzezinski, who was advisor for Obama and for Jimmy Carter, came up with Global 2000. And Zygmunt Brzezinski said, it's easier today to kill 1 million people in Africa than to control them. And that's when they start sending all of this bad food into Africa, forcing these African nations to take these foods. So don't tell me about these people. Pfizer ain't got no good history with Africa. Pfizer has been sued recently. We can't make this seem like this was history a long time ago. No, we're talking about months ago. We're talking about a couple of years ago, where Pfizer in one of our African nations took a vaccine in that injured hundreds in various villages and got sued. We have the suit. You can go online. Where Pfizer right now is paying Africa because the efficacy studies is not as strict as America and European countries. Bill Gates sent a Techna shot into Kenya just a couple of years ago. This ain't no long history. A Techna shot. And that Techna shot was given to Kenyan women. And a year later, nearly 1 million women between the age of 13 and 18 became sterile, and it was a white Catholic priest who caught it. And this was Bill Gates and the World Health Organization. I'm telling you, man, we can't trust none of them. I don't feel until they come clean and can show me they have no vested interest. They're not getting money from the pharmaceutical industry. They do not own stock. Fauci, do you know this man owns these vaccines? Do you know this man got money into the pharmaceutical companies? How can I trust him? He's in the pockets of Bill Gates. No. They should never be hired to do the efficacy studies if their hands is in the pockets of the pharmaceutical companies. To me, until that is researched, until we know emphatically that some of them are not involved, and when many of them leave the FDA and leave HHS and leave NIH, guess where they get jobs at? They get jobs with Pfizer. They get jobs with Johnson & Johnson. I'm telling you, you all, and when the polio vaccine, they were saying it was safe. We didn't know it had SV40, simian SV40, which causes tumors to grow that could become cancerous. And so, it's that kind of history, dear brother. And I just wanted to say that these people, none of them, even the way they do the efficacy studies is not done right. Nobody should be associated or connected to the pharmaceutical industry or their cash register. And we, the American people, have to demand that it's like that. And if it's not, but what you do not know is that the pharmaceutical industry have more lobbyists per capita even than the oil companies. They are on our politicians like white on rice. And when I went to Sacramento here in Los Angeles, when they forced the vaccine on our children and took away the exemption, every Black politician received money from the pharmaceutical industry to the tune of millions, and I couldn't get not one of them to sit down with me. And we found out that they've been bought out. Something ain't right, man, and it breaks my heart. Even today, we're in a fight that they're offering tens of thousands of dollars to the churches in California. They wouldn't even allow us to open up to have services, but yet now they're opening up the church for people to be vaccinated because the preachers are struggling financially. We're being used. And so therefore, man, I don't trust none of it until the FDA, until I can see their record to see who they're associated with, who's giving you your check. Do you take a grant from the pharmaceutical industry? Then you get off the board and put people on the board who will not lie, who cannot be bought out, who cannot be visited at night and given a sack of money and then go in there and lie about the studies. See, and until I hear both sides, you see, look, CNN, ABC, CBS, all controlled by the pharmaceutical industry. Look at the commercials. 70% of the commercials are pharmaceutical. So they all have the same narrative. It used to be a time, dear brother, where you could hear the science who is for it and the scientists who disagree. We're not hearing that today. I want to be educated by both sides. I want to hear the pros. I want to hear the cons. Y'all battle it out and let me sit back and determine whether I want to do this or not. But don't give me a narrative telling me to take a vaccine, Dr. Oben, where we know 98% of the people who get COVID recovers. They're not telling you that. So something ain't right, you know? And so, you know, as I've talked to Tony Braxton and other entertainers who had their children vaccinated, they said they knew it was the vaccine. Her boy was fine. He was talking, he was walking, he was playing games, and it was right after the vaccine he went docile. Same thing with Rodney Pete and his wife. When we talked to them, same thing. See, something is wrong. Something is wrong. And we can think it's not pointing at us. We think it's the police who just don't like us. We'll get angry when we get shot with a bullet. You better watch that needle that you're being shot with. See, we don't know what's in these vaccines. The pediatricians don't know. I went to different clinics and I went and asked the pediatricians and the nurses, a group of us. We filmed one of them, said, Doc, you're a pediatrician and I see that 100% of your patients are 100% in compliance. I said, can you tell me the ingredients of the MMR vaccine? He couldn't do it. I said, could you get your nurses to tell me? They couldn't do it. I said, would you go get one of the boxes and open it up and read the insert on the side effects? And one of the nurses read it. And when she saw that one of the potentials of this vaccine is the child can die, she had never read it. Something ain't right, bro. So I will never, ever trust the United States government. I don't care how sweet they sound. I'll never trust a Biden. Never. The same man, you know, that put all our brothers away in prison, now acting like he cares about us. No, sir. You don't have a good track record with us. And so until we get more Dr. Odens, until we get more people like that, that's going to go beat it up. And until some of our Black leaders should sit on some of these boards of FDA and HHS, let us watch what you're doing. See, not some of these people, you pay some of our Black people and you parade them in front of us. That's the Tuskegee Protocol. They use the doctor, they use Nurse Rivers, who was trusted in the Black community. She did not know. They're not wicked, brother. Many of our Black doctors, they just believe. They just trust. They trust Fauci and don't even check him. See? And you know, white people know all they got to do is pat us on the head and act nice, and we trust them without checking them. And so I have a problem with that. I have a problem with the sister that Fauci is parading around us saying she is one of the scientists that put this together. Prove it to me. Show me where she did it. Because they got scientists who can slip stuff by you that you don't even know what's in it. And so I'm not a scientist, and this is why I will never medically advise people. But if this government ever goes to force vaccination, that is a declaration of war. You cannot enact the Emergency Preparedness Act. If you read that act, the only way they can force vaccinate you is if there's no other treatments out there or therapies, and there's plenty. There's plenty other therapies other than that vaccine. See? So they cannot enact that act, but they're trying to do it. They're trying to put us to sleep. So when a Louis Farrakhan and the minister told them, Dr. Oben last July, he said, you'll never get in control of this virus. It's going to change directions on you. It's going to mutate. And now you coming up that we got to take another vaccine. I close with this, brother. Moderna ain't no pharmaceutical company. They have never made no medicine. They never made a pill. When did they get into the medical field? They're a technology company. And they didn't tell you when Moderna did their low dose study on the group that they was testing, 100% of them got serious side effects. I'm sorry, the high dose group. And the low dose group, 80% of them got side effects. See, autoimmune deficiencies. You know, I can't trust that, man. And the study was done on healthy people. They haven't did a study on the sick. Right now, we're getting reports on convalescence home and senior citizens home where there was literally no COVID. And many of these people, after taking the vaccine 2 weeks later, in one convalescent home in New York, 24 dead. They're not telling you about that. Go study the SARS report. Who's dying from this vaccine is not being reported. Who's having serious side effects where they're shaking and quaking and their immune system is palpitating so hard the way they're having heart attacks. Oh, man. I like this platform, and it nearly brings me to tears. You know, that we have it's sad to have a government that you can't trust. It's sad to have a government that try to manipulate us into doing things so that they can get back to business as usual, making money at the expense of wiping out the people. And I'm not gonna wait 20 years from now to where some of us are gonna look stupid and we're gonna come back on, oops, it did cause cancer. Oops, we're sorry. You know, so Clinton, to tell me you sorry for the Tuskegee experiment, you did not do nothing in the form of reparation, of repairing what you did. So, brother, pardon I may have missed what you wanted me to say, but I'm saying to you that every government agency, in my opinion, is conflicted. They have a conflict of interest. And until that is removed, we can't trust them.
Thank you so much. And I do believe you find a lot more empirical answers when you follow the money, when you follow the idea of who gets paid for what. So we do have a young lady with us. I hope she's still with us. Sister Sarah, who is one who works in the medical field. Is Sister Sarah still with us?
Yes, I am.
Okay, well, as you have heard this conversation, and you as a professional in the field, would you please like to add to what it is that this conversation has done? And I'm sorry it took me to get so long to you, Sister Sarah, because you know I appreciate your thoughts.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for putting all this together and all the good work you are doing in Wyoming. I'm very, very happy for everything that you're doing. Thank you. And I agree with both people on board. I get to see a lot of patients, like we are in the deep Black community in Buffalo. And so I get to see a lot of Black patients, and we talk about their mistrust for the medical field. And I feel like they have a valid point. Most of the time, we read about the fact that this vaccine is very new, and it's kind of like, it seemed like it's experimental. So it's like, I don't want to get the vaccine until I know that this is right before I get it. And a lot of Black people, like, they can see that they test this vaccines and stuff like that on people in jail, in prisons. And those people are our brothers. And a lot of the times we don't know what they are doing and what the outcome is. So to protect yourselves and your families, we tend to, as Black people, we tend to be like, we don't want history to repeat itself by being the people that they are experimenting with. And so they tend to not want to trust the medical field with all their experimental stuff. And hold on for a second. Can you give me a minute, please?
You're muted, Dr. Dixon.
Unmute yourself, Doc.
Okay, I apologize. Where we are right now is we're going to ask everyone who wants to be a part of this to give us their thoughts. We've had some comments and we're going to go to them, but feel free to shoot us your questions on this very important subject. And again, go back to the way we looked at certain things. Our idea tonight was to challenge the mainstream narrative, and without a question, it's being challenged. And as a Black Studies Center, that is our job, to begin to talk about specifically how this deals and how it works itself out to the Black population. Now, many of you, particularly Wyomingites, who don't get a chance to have a thought outside of the inclusiveness of Wyoming. Well, we're in an education setting. So this is where we should have those conversations. But let me be very clear. I go back to what Brother Minister said. The United States government does not have a good record. In fact, it's not even a poor record. It's a horrid record. It's a horrible record in what they do to others. None as much as they do to the Black population within this, and that's a nation within a nation. So we can think about how we move forward from here, but to forget about the past and not look at it in very specific terms and who benefited most from the most violent events in America and who paid the dearest price. But let us be very clear. To have this conversation tonight, this is what's needed. And for many of you, it won't change anything on your job. It won't change anything in your house. It won't change anything in your mindset. But you cannot say we did not talk about this in a way that challenged the mainstream narrative. So feel free to give us your thoughts, to give us your comments, your concerns, because this is what we want to do. We want to put them on the table and have this dialogue. But let's go right back to the idea of what we were saying. What does this particular vaccine, and why is it so controversial, particularly for Black? If you would go ahead and finish your thoughts, Sister Sarah.
Yes, one of the things that I wanted to say is that a lot of the times, Black people will come to the hospital, and some of them say, like, they trust what the doctor has to say. So the doctor will order stuff.
Where did the X-ray go?
I don't know.
Like, it's still over there, right?
Right, it's over there.
Oh, okay.
Knock on that door, sorry. Yes, knock on the main door over there.
Sister Sarah, if you could finish up really quickly.
Yes, so most of the time, like, the doctor will just order stuff and the patient doesn't know. So they just say, I trust you. And a lot of times it's not right. But so I'm thinking Black people need to do their research and ask questions, because sometimes they think the person knows what they are talking about and they don't. And then there are other times that Black people might come to the hospital and they exhibit, like they will show their symptoms, what is going on, but they are not trusted, they are not believed. So sometimes the doctors and the nurses assume that they are there seeking medication, they are there seeking painkillers. So by the time they realize that this person is actually having a medical problem, it's too late. And so then they tell people that Black people are dying from COVID because they have pre-existing conditions, which their white counterparts might come in, but they get treated for what they need to be treated for, just because they believed them. And so it's kind of sad in that term. So I feel like we need more Black people in the medical field, because sometimes when we have Black people, we tend to have that empathy. When we see a patient, you kind of like see that this could be my family member. And so you give them the best that they are supposed to get. Unlike, a lot of the nurses that I see, some white nurses are amazing. And some of them, they don't see themselves in that patient. So they treat them unfairly. And so all these things going on, it gives the Black community, it doesn't give them the security that when they come to the medical field, they are going to be treated just like their white counterparts. They don't get treated right. And so I don't want your vaccine if you're not going to treat me the same way you treat white people.
Okay, well, thank you so much. We appreciate it, and thank you for joining us, and your ideas and your voice is very well heard tonight, so we thank you. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you for having me.
Dr. Oden, I think this is right around the time that we begin to wrap up. We want to be respectful of everyone's time, and I think from the very beginning, this has been a very challenging conversation and much needed. So in many ways, Dr. Oden, what do we look for, particularly when we have this set of experiences from a shared reality? And what can we expect with that backdrop, with what I think is something that is indeed nefarious?
I think we need to, like the sister just say, really do our research on this to educate ourselves in terms of what is really going on. Some of the information that Brother Muhammad shared, I didn't know Dr. Fauci was actually involved with, the FDA or with the different companies. I didn't research that part of it. I do know that from the research that I've gathered, when they did look at the different vaccines and the clinical trials, they did have some individuals who had medical conditions. So they show, for example, with Moderna, some had high risk conditions that those are people who had lung disease were part of that study, heart disease, obesity, diabetes, liver disease, they were part of that group. With Pfizer, they did have people who were obese, people who had diabetes and pulmonary disease were also included. So some people who had some of the serious health conditions that we are concerned about were included in the study, in the various clinical trials that they did have. So we need to look at that as well. I think we need to, one of the big things that people were concerned about, if they get the vaccine, are they going to test positive for the virus, things like that. They need to know that with this particular vaccine, they may test positive for antibodies because the body, if they were to get the vaccine, and I do know people who have gotten the vaccine, who are in the medical field, they've gotten the vaccine because their employers kind of made it so that they needed to take the vaccine, right? And so they did. I've not had the vaccine, but they did have the vaccine. It shows that they may have some antibodies. So the body produces antibodies against a specific antigen to help them combat any type of illness or anything that may be occurring within the body. I think I saw one in the chat. Someone says, well, what is the purpose of the vaccine? Why is it being pushed? Why are people being kind of guided towards perhaps taking the vaccine? It's really, from what I've gathered, they're trying to reduce the number of infections, if at all possible, trying to see, can they get back to what is normal? But I don't think we're gonna get back to what used to be normal. This is a new kind of a situation, a new normal, which to me isn't all totally bad. I don't mind, for example, if people wear their mask during flu season. Come on, I'm not interested in getting the flu or the colds and different things like that. So it's not a bad idea. If people are sick, wear the mask anyway. I'm not completely opposed to, the physical contact, the handshaking all the time, because people don't, let's be real, people don't always wash their hands, right? And so things are transmitted that way. So some of the things that are going on right now, I think are going to be part of what's going to be the new norm. And I think this particular virus is going to be around. This is my own judgment, right? I think it's going to be around for a long period of time. I think we're going to have to learn how to live with it, so it may become endemic in the population. Endemic meaning that this is around all the time. It's typically found in the environment. So I don't see that necessarily going completely away. I see us actually trying to figure out ways to manage this better. Just like Brother Muhammad said, the majority of the people who are infected do in fact recover from this particular virus. But we also know that a number of people don't recover. Younger people, older people, we know all different age groups are impacted by this virus. There are already 485,000 deaths in the United States, but almost 28 million positive cases were found in the US, and with 485,000 deaths. Those are a lot of lives that were lost. And if we think about, when we were, having, 100,000 infected per day and, 200,000 showing infections per day. If we saw, we had like 3,000 deaths in one day, over 3,000 deaths, if we saw things like that happening with airplanes, for example, right? So that would be like 10 jets falling out of the sky, and so in one day, that would be a bit alarming, right? We know we need to do something. We know, so we need to have the scientists in place. We need to have the research done. We need all of that in order to feel comfortable. I completely get it, but it is an urgent time, right? We have to do something to try to prevent the number of deaths, prevent the number of infections, and try to get back to where we can interact regularly with each other. We know that people don't do well in isolation. We see a lot of mental health issues occurring as a result of this separation that's taking place. And we know something has to be done, but we have to be comfortable in whatever that particular thing is, right? Whatever direction we decide to go in. So I say, do your research. These are things, it's not going to go away tomorrow. It's going to take some time. We know that. And we have to be very careful. We have to raise the alarms. And we do see, say a lot of vaccines going to one particular country, perhaps that has more people of color, things like that. We need to pay attention, right? And see what are the outcomes in those places as well. Do our research. That's the best thing I can say. But just be aware, try to protect yourself as much as possible. Yes, people recover, but it's not always the case for everybody. Everyone's different. Your DNA is different from someone else's. So when the virus gets in, it's going to respond differently in your situation. And if you have underlying health conditions, it just increases the risk that much more. So, but do research.
Dr. Oben, Shabazz, for your insight. And to all of you all, we want to thank you for sending your messages and your comments. We have gotten to the point where a few of the questions, we took those comments and placed them in indirectly. So you've heard some of those topics, but we thank you for being so active as a participant. And before we go, Brother Minister, if you could give us your thoughts as a wrap up, and to both of you all, thank you for your time. Couldn't ask you for a better conversation, and I really appreciate Get the Wheels Turning about the actual facts. So if you would, give us your closing thoughts, Brother Minister, and we appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you. I agree with a lot of what Dr. Oben is saying. And not only just do your research, but brother, there are other countries that's doing a better job than America.
Yes.
You know, we got to stop acting like America knows more than everybody else. She does not. I'm sorry. And I believe, this is just me, I'm spiritual. And I believe in the Bible. I believe in the prophecies of both Bible and Quran. I believe America is being chastised by God because of what she's done. And if you look at other nations, if you look at Egypt, when God was ready to destroy her, it was earthquakes, pestilence, see? Pestilence, diseases, viruses coming from him. America needs to repent. Out of all the civilized nations in the world, why is she suffering the most? I'm saying, ask that from a spiritual perspective, and then you can hand it over to the scientists. Cuba, for instance, have some of the best treatments and the best doctors in the world. And they was invited to over 19 countries when this pandemic first happened, and got the pandemics under control in over 59 countries. What are they doing that we're not doing? What therapies do Cuba have? This little old country, Cuba. What are they doing that America is not doing? And because there's a sanction, we can't even call on their doctors to come and help us with our pandemic when they have almost eradicated it in many of their countries, because we know as a people, Dr. we suffer from a vitamin D deficiency.
Yes.
And if we just got more sun, now they're telling us to stay in the house. You know, cover yourself up. You need sun. They haven't even did scientific studies on the mask. Why is it that when a patient is sick, the doctor wear the mask, but the patient don't? See? What's in the mask? What are the chemicals you're breathing in when your body can't get enough oxygen? What does that do to the body? We got to study this thing from top to bottom. I do believe we should wear masks, but I don't know if I should wear it all day, you know? And so I just think we should find, where are the best practices? We talk crap against China, you know, and we get involved with all of this war. They're communists, they're this. Okay, what did they do from a scientific standpoint to get their country under control? What did Cuba do? See, what's going on in Africa where they seem to have a better control? And as Doc said, when we do all of the research, and we need doctors that are conscious. We don't need doctors that are not conscious. They gotta love themselves. You know, and I'm gonna tell you, this is why I got a big respect for my Jewish brethren. When I was doing the research with Bobby Kennedy, and we met with the Jewish epidemiologists and virologists, they said, we don't play that. We don't touch no vaccines until our scientists who have pledged with their life give us the okay. That's what we need. That's what we need, dear brother. We don't need people like Fauci and others who have a vested interest and who have patents, and they're in the pockets of different types of people. See, and if he ain't, make me out of a liar. Let's check. See, so not only do we do our research, we gotta now find doctors. And right now, Minister Farrakhan and other scientists have come by his side to do studies and to pledge to find best practices throughout the world, not just in America, and bring those practices back to the community so that we can say, hey, have you tried Paximune? Have you tried different therapies that you don't have to do the vaccine? Have you increased your vitamin D? See, why don't we get back to how to eat to live? We were taught how to eat to live. We wouldn't have these preconditions. in the Nation of Islam, it's rare we're getting COVID-19. It's not hitting us. You know, I'm in my 60s. And so I'm saying we got to do, and I tell you, sis, you are so right. We are obese, and we are obese because of the foods, and we just got to do our research. So all I say, I'm not anti-vax, but here's what the Supreme Court said, that vaccines will always be unavoidably unsafe. There is no such thing as a safe vaccine. None of them are safe. So I thank you for this opportunity. And I have Bobby Kennedy and I executive produce a documentary on medical apartheid that's coming out next week, where we have some of the top scientists throughout the world who disagree with Fauci, who disagree with some of these other scientists in America, where you never get them challenged. I want to see Fauci get challenged. I want to see the scientists of the FDA. I want to see them sitting on us and then get challenged. And when that happens, brother, maybe then I'll find some way to trust this. But no, I need a Dr. Oben and others like her, because I love her balance. You know, she's not unbalanced, and that's what we need. Me, I come hard. I love my community, and I don't care who you are. If you come in here with that crap, we're going to stand up, and you're going to have to prove to us that this worked. They don't know if this is going to work. So thank you. May God bless you, and I hope you don't become a part of this experiment. Do not take their vaccine.
I want to say one thing quickly, and I know you want to wrap up, but I wish we had more time, because I would love to talk more about the vitamin
What we need
D.
is a part 2, Dr. Oden.
That's what we need.
That's
the vitamin
what we need,
D
a part 2.
deficiency is something that's very real, and you know, talk with your healthcare provider if you need to. It is a fat soluble vitamin, right? So that means you need to intake some fat. And if you're going to take supplemental vitamin D in order for it to be absorbed and used properly in the body, but it is stored in the body when you use vitamin D. So, but it is something very important. The sun is very important, like you mentioned. How to eat to live is vital. We know that your body has a circadian rhythm, right? So what time you should eat, what time you should stop eating at night, all of that plays a part in your risk factors for developing various illnesses. I would love to talk more about that, but there's so much. I'm excited about this topic. I wish we had more time.
Well, I just say to you all, our idea today was to put it on the table. And I do believe that, in all honesty, we need a part 2, 3, 4, and 5. And where we are tonight is just scratching the surface. But what I say to both of you all is, when I was thinking about this and how to deal with this, let me take a step back. At a lot of institutions, this conversation is just not happening. Think about the title: Medical Mistrust, Vaccines, and the Black Community. That's as straightforward as we can be. And today, the conversation in itself exceeded. So I thank you all. You know, if there's anything that I can do to repay what you've given us tonight, I'm only a phone call away. Brother Minister, I thank you so much. Dr. Oden, Shabazz, you know, I thank you so much. I think this is one of those times when we can all say that what we did here tonight moved the needle forward, at least about having the conversation.
Yeah, people can find more research at noi.org/vaccines.
Yes, sir. And we are looking forward to the video that's coming out. So we would like to get that, particularly in my introduction to African American history class. So I will be in touch with you, and you know, brother, I will call you. You know I will.
Thank you.
So that being the case, and thank you, Dr. Oden, Shabazz, and thank you for everybody who came, participated. I'm sorry we couldn't get to more comments. We tried to inject them, but please keep up with us, because Monday, the 15th, we will be having a second part of our cinematic series, Cinematic Realism and Racist Propaganda. And we'll be going over the movie Before They Die, which is a lens from the death of Black Wall Street by survivors. So you want to be a part of that too. But again, to those who came tonight, we thank you. And again, to our panelists and Sister Sarah, we thank you all so much. I see you, Brother Troy, and thank you for everything. And please remember, as everyone has said, do your research.
Yes.
Can you cut
Thank
that,
you so
Toby?
much.
Can you cut